The last year has seen extraordinary changes in the Middle East, changes that have even surprised our Middle East expert, Anthony Billingsley. Anthony, we've witnessed an amazing year in the Middle East with the Arab Spring, which has thrown 4 Arab autocrats from power. Why has this happened now, and what does it mean for us globally?
Fran, in some respects, this is not something that just happened last year. It's something that's been building up over perhaps generations. That we've seen people frustrated by declining economic conditions, inability to find work, the increasing distance of government from people, and the increasing intrusion of government and their cronies into the economy. And what this has done has driven ordinary people to desperate measures. We can go back to 2005 in Egypt, and demonstrations were starting then. Union strikes all through the country over the past 10 years. So to an extent what we're talking about is the denouement, if you like, of processes that have been going for some time.
The United States and the Middle East, they've been strange bedfellows since World War II. What do you imagine their relationship will be within the next decade?
The Americans have found this process very difficult to deal with, very difficult to come to terms with, because in one level they've had very comfortable relationships with some of these dictators who have been thrown out or in trouble. They haven't addressed the issue of democracy. When the Americans look at the Middle East and they have a choice between democracy and tyranny, they tend to choose tyranny because that's stability and that's what they want. We're seeing increasingly the Americans starting to step away from the issue of Palestine, so that they're leaving it to the Palestinians and the Israelis to sort out their own concerns. Increasingly the Americans' influence is declining. Their ability to get people in the Middle East to trust them, to listen to them, to believe them, has dropped dramatically, not just with George Bush, but also with Barack Obama. So, and we're seeing rivals coming up, the Chinese and the Russians, starting to tread into what was traditionally American territory. So the American position is very equivocal at the moment.
So they could lose that hold that they had over the Middle East for so long?
To an extent, I think they already have. They remain the most powerful country on earth. They retain the capacity to send troops wherever they want, but they've lost some of the will to do that, and they've lost the ability to frighten countries, to frighten people. Before, if the Americans said, you better do this or else, you would find those countries and the people would. Now they're all saying, well, okay, if you're going to want us to do that, you're going to have to send the troops in. And that's a big issue for the Americans at this stage, when they're actually withdrawing from Afghanistan, from Iraq, etc.
And then we also have the issue at the moment of Iran and its nuclear capabilities, and how the US and Israel will respond to that. What do you imagine will happen with that situation?
At the moment, I'm very nervous. The evidence is, and the evidence is supported by the American intelligence services, the Israeli intelligence services, and senior politicians and officials in those two countries, that Iran is not working towards nuclear weapons. But the rhetoric in the United States and Israel is the exact opposite. And it seems to be driving these two countries to increasingly serious threats against Iran, and the Iranians being equally bellicose in response. We're talking about the possibility of Israel attacking Iran in April or May, when the weather conditions improve. If that happens, that will very seriously damage Western interests, American interests, and Israeli interests as well, I think. We just have to hope that the administration retains the capacity to hold back these wild demands and wild claims, which they've been doing reasonably well so far. But we're in an election year, and there's a problem.
And why is that a problem?
Because Obama cannot be seen to be weak on Palestine, on Iran in particular, but all these other issues that are bubbling along. And so, whilst his instinct, I think, is to seek diplomatic solutions, the pressure on him from the right is so intense that he may eventually find himself unable to stop the Israelis from attacking, or drawn in himself, the Americans themselves, into some sort of military action, because the Americans have large numbers of troops and ships in the area as it is.
So as well as the situation in Iran, we've got the problems in Syria, which have been bubbling away for a while now. What are your thoughts on the UN and the Arab League's inability to try and solve this situation in Syria?
The Arab League role is very complex in that, to an extent, it's not the Arab League as such that's pushing for intervention in Syria. It's been the Saudis and the countries allied to the Saudis in their anti-democratic phase. What they don't want is the problems in Syria to spill over into their country, which might then create demands for change in Saudi Arabia as well. They're also trying to separate the Syrians from Iran. The Syrians and Iran have had an alliance, an informal alliance, but for 30 years now, and it's been very useful to both sides. So here's an opportunity, and this is what I think the League has been trying to achieve. It hasn't really been serious in terms of the democratic rights of Syrians. So you've got that sort of qualified action on the part of the Arab League. In the case of the United Nations, the problem there, I think, has been that when the Russians and the Chinese supported action against Libya, they thought that they were endorsing a very limited set of actions. And what do they see but the Americans, the British and the French expanding the mandate way beyond what was envisaged. And so those two countries are determined that that's not going to happen again. And the problem is that they're very worried that they'll introduce the terms regime change. And again, they're very concerned about that concept and the idea that that should be something that the UN can get into. The UN should not be about regime change, according to those countries. So we've got this issue where, unless the West will back away from calling for regime change, the Russians and the Chinese, I think, will continue to prevent any action. If a compromise could be worked out, then the UN has a role. I think both sides in the Syrian conflict would probably love an honest broker, somebody that they both could trust, someone who'd give them a way out of this terrible carnage that they've got themselves involved in.
So in all these areas that we've discussed, is there a common theme?
And I think there's definitely been a theme of democracy and things like that, but I think one of the most interesting aspects has been the way in which youth have come to the fore in this process. We're talking about a region where traditionally young people have respected their elders, have obeyed their elders, have followed the rules set down by their elders. Now we're seeing young people saying, no, we don't agree with this process anymore. We want change and we want to do it our way. And in this process, they're using the new social media, all new technologies, which the older people, of course, don't understand. And so there's this whole process going along under the surface. And I suspect that over time, we're going to start to see the effects of this, that as the young people of today who've been out there demonstrating get older, become more involved in government and business, etc., they're going to start changing the way these political systems are run. And so I think in the long run, this could be the largest, most significant development in the whole process.
Thank you for your insights today, Anthony.
You're welcome.